Coming up, the United Kingdom racks up significant planet heating gases as a developed nation and global powerhouse. And tackling its carbon footprint receives both praise and ridicule.
This has to end.
So you get a lot of people that are moaning about ULEZ.
ULEZ has been an unequivocal success.
Everybody ready?
Native herbivores are reintroduced into England's forests for the first time in centuries, and in the chambers of London's Hampton Court Palace, global corporations discuss their climate responsibilities.
The majority of money that goes into investing in research on the African continent, that money stays strangely in the global north.
But do these private meetings benefit disaster-hit nations or the wealthiest?
Do you think this is a significant problem?
The challenge as well as the opportunity that we have is to begin to see things less from a financing perspective, but much more from an investment perspective.
Just 2 degrees is on. Now, we know the answers to these questions. Why don't we implement them?
That's my point.
There's a tension between profitability and tension between responsibility.
This is one of the most visited cities in the world, the third actually, after Bangkok and Istanbul.
London has an impressive tourism culture, art, theatre, food from every corner of the globe, and some of the most iconic buildings. The Tower of London, London Eye, and the Big Ben, the world's most Instagrammed clock.
And of late, there seems to be more to enjoy in London. More polluting vehicles have been taken off the road, and air quality has improved significantly, according to a new report.
The good news is the result of a scheme expanded back in 2023 by London's Mayor, Sadiq Khan. The Ultra-Low Emissions Zone, or ULEZ, aimed to reduce emissions and harmful concentrations of pollutants.
But first, Sadiq Khan says that ULEZ has been an unequivocal success.
After a study by City Hall found 5 boroughs that opposed its expansion have seen the largest reductions in nitrogen oxides.
The report says there's 27% less nitrogen dioxide in the city, as around 97% of all vehicles in London are now ULEZ compliant. And in 2023, there was an estimated 80% reduction in people exposed to illegal levels of pollution.
No level of air pollution is safe. It can lead to thousands of premature deaths and a whole host of health issues from asthma to cancer, heart disease, strokes and dementia.
But these results did not come without considerable sacrifice. ULEZ has been a divisive topic across the city, and when Mayor Khan announced its expansion, there was a political maelstrom. Widespread opposition and misinformation spread like wildfire, including several unsuccessful legal challenges by city councils, debunked information about the plan charging drivers for how far they've travelled, and when a conservative anti-ULEZ Facebook group popped up, numerous Islamophobic posts and comments targeted Khan and impacted public perception of his climate policies.
It's unfair and it affects the poorest people the most.
But the recent ULEZ report suggests that Khan's endeavours were not in vain. A group of independent advisory experts concluded that the scheme has had a positive effect on London's air quality. It's improving faster than the rest of England. Since his youth, King Charles has had a soft spot for the environment. So in 2020, he launched what he called the Sustainable Markets Initiative. It was hoped that this would be a forum for the private sector to lay out its economic case, if you will, for transitioning to a sustainable future. But has the King's initiative lived up to expectations? It's only been 5 years. Let's take a look.
Here at the Sustainable Markets Initiative Summit, the private sector met to address their role in the climate crisis and work out strategies for engaging the public sector while maintaining their profits. But while we were here, and ironically, this news hit.
A stunning development off the northeastern coast of England. An oil tanker carrying jet fuel has collided with a cargo ship.
The tanker was ablaze and leaking off northeast England with more than 30 crews sent to hospital.
Environmentalists say the impacts of the collision may take weeks to months to fully determine.
These were the first images of the collision between a vessel and a cargo ship, which usually carries highly toxic chemicals, including one called sodium cyanide.
Would you say that the UK has strong regulations when it comes to incidents like this that threaten people and the environment?
The chemical industry has very strict guidelines on the transport of chemicals. Containers have to be well labelled, or they ought to be, and with clear information on the outside of containers and drums to indicate what is being transported and what the risk is to anybody who handles those containers. And those guidelines and rules have been worked out and been in operation for many years. It's called the Global Harmonized System. And I think the transportation, if it was followed according to what the law requires, would indicate that it was carried appropriately. But of course, you cannot take account of a collision such as occurred here, which was pretty catastrophic. And it would be difficult to design anything, I think, that would withstand something like the collision that's just happened.
Now back to the Sustainable Markets Initiative Summit, where we spoke with several industry leaders, including Dr. Hubert Danso, the CEO of Africa Investor Group. He's worked closely with King Charles to help foster economic growth and sustainable development across the continent.
I guess I'd like to start by asking, how would you characterize the current collaboration, current communication between the public and private sector, government and corporations when it comes to achieving global sustainability development goals?
The Sustainable Markets Initiative Astracata roundtables and exhibition is really the answer to your question. Right now we have over 300 government leaders, investors meeting with governments because we have a very common interest, and it's a long-standing common interest to ensure that we can build this resilient low-carbon economy and drive sustainable change in the future for people, planet and nature. So we're very close. But being very close doesn't necessarily mean that we are there. And I think the difference here is that we are really aligning our mandates as investors, as business leaders, with government's policy capacity and government mandates to see how we can accelerate and scale the implementation of this transition.
You say we're very close. What would you say is the most significant gap in reaching where we need to be?
Well, I think the original mandate was very government originated, was government designed, and there was a little bit of a mismatch between the mandates of private capital and the mandates of private sector, with the aspirations of civil society and the aspirations of government.
Describe a bit those mandates. How do they differ significantly?
Well, I think that everyone really wants to see the same outcome, but we all have different governance structures which determine exactly how we can use both public and private resources to accomplish that. And within the private sector, we absolutely see climate and we see sustainability as a financial issue. It's a resilience issue, and I think in government they see it as a public responsibility and of course a governance issue. Now it's just a case of how can we align interests, and that's really all about how can we co-create the future that we want and need that's going to be resilient for future generations, and how can we do it in the most expedient and scalable fashion that's most responsible for our collective objectives. His Majesty King Charles, as you know, has brought us all together as the Sustainable Markets Initiative. I chair the Africa Council, but there's a need for other heads of state to take this type of view around the serious power that private sector, institutional pools of capital, working with governments, the incredible transformative change that we can have together if we can get this alignment right. And that's exactly why this is such a very powerful Sustainable Markets Initiative, Akerele Roundtable and Exhibition. It's one of the first times you've actually seen this combination of players come together, all looking towards the same solution with the same sense of urgency, with the same sense of scale.
As you're right, there's no way the world can do this without the private sector. But one of the criticisms is that the private sector's main goal is profit. How do you integrate this requirement for investors, for its self-existence, profit?
Look, I think we all have our mandates, as I mentioned before. And a growing and thriving economy is what we know how to do as business. And when we invest to generate a market-appropriate return. And what we're basically saying is we see climate and sustainability as a business risk. If it's not managed properly, it will have a negative effect on our business. If it's managed properly, the wider society and community benefit. And I think that's really where we have that point of alignment. And I think that's what governments have sort of begun to understand. Business has been demonized for a very, very long time because everyone sort of has their constituency and they take a view. But right now, there's no constituency that is strong enough to deal with climate change and the existential risk that it faces, that it's presenting to us. And I think that's really what we are realizing, probably a little bit late, because right now, unfortunately, as you would have heard in the opening session from people like Secretary Kerry, where they're basically saying we're now at a stage where, unfortunately, because we've been dithering, because we haven't come together as fast enough, which is why we really appreciate His Majesty bringing us together here under the SMI, Akerele roundtables and exhibitions. We haven't been quick enough to understand that we've lost so much momentum that now we are really fighting to deal with managing and mitigating the worst consequences of climate change.
You brought up some points in your response that reminded me of a study that came out recently that talked about the majority of money that goes into investing in research on the African continent. That money stays strangely in the global north, as opposed to investing in studies done by Africans for Africans. Do you think this is a significant problem? The fact that money that is meant to go to the continent does not reach the people that need it?
Well, I don't think that's a continental issue. I think it's an issue no matter what it is. Money that's supposed to go to one place should go to that place, if that's really the case. But I think there's also some underlying benefits that are supposed to come from the sort of application of that resource. And I wonder what the output of that is, but I can't talk specifically to that case. But I think the challenge as well as the opportunity that we have is to begin to see things less from a financing perspective, but much more from an investment perspective. We need to invest in creating the future that we want. And I think the problem on the continent is that we've basically had decades of being a developmental project, while the rest of the world is establishing itself as a globally competitive investment destination. And I think right now, that's where the continent is. We now have the Nairobi Declaration that over 40 African heads of state have subscribed to, which says our transition as the African continent is going to be driven in partnership with the private sector through green industrialization. And I think you're going to see, which is what we're seeing here now, the step change of what the possibilities are for Africa to become, a global green industrial manufacturing hub.
Well, two men dressed in natural and synthetic materials while chatting about climate change may be a bit ironic, as the fashion industry uses massive amounts of energy and water. Making 1 kilogram of fabric generates nearly 24 kilos of greenhouse gases, and around 20% of global industrial wastewater pollution comes from the industry. That's why I reached out to Omoyemi Akerele, the CEO of Lagos Fashion Week, to understand her role as a producer in this climate-sensitive era. Talk about reimagining fashion. What exactly does that mean when it comes to sustainability?
I think that's very broad in the sense that, what aspects are we trying to reimagine? Is it the fact that man is primarily focused with the idea that it's just us and, there are no other species out there that we need to be mindful about, in terms of creating balance? Are we thinking in terms of intergenerational and safe, justice systems where we have to ensure that, we're thinking about resources and, the people and communities that have contributed to all of that and, trying to ensure there's a balance? Are we thinking intergenerational? Doing waste generation, what are we doing in terms of the people? Are we people-minded? So it's really quite broad in that sense, and it's always important that, we explore and really do understand what conversation that we're having.
One of the major criticisms of the industry is the fast fashion's effects on the climate, the types of materials they use, the chemicals that are used in creating clothing. From your perspective, what is your critique of large brands and whether you think they're doing enough and can be doing more to get to some level of sustainability in fashion?
So my biggest problem with fast fashion and my biggest problem with companies that own fast fashion brands and sustainability is everyone is trying to problem solve instead of really addressing what the problem is. So everyone is trying to we know this is what the problem is, but how can I innovate around that problem? I don't want that problem to go away, but I want to do better, but when we're all able to be like, if we're really being real, we're producing way too much, using materials that's way too... The word I wanted to use, I can't say that on camera, my children.
Don't.
Using materials that we shouldn't be using.
Okay, this is a big point you're bringing up. If we know the answers to these questions, why don't we implement them?
That's my point, exactly. So why are we not? Because there's that tension, and that's the problem. There's a tension between profitability and tension between responsibility, but nobody wants to admit that there is tension. So while you might have boardrooms filled with people who know better, because recently there's a clamor to ensure that people are ESG compliant, like everyone who's on board from a risk audit, everyone understands what's going on, but maybe that's not even it, because the people who are looking at the bottom line are watching the bottom line, and they're constantly that can be the only explanation. Nobody wants to cut down custom production, nobody wants to take a pay cut. Everybody just wants the problem to go away. And that's why, maybe there's some people we shouldn't be bashing. At least they're being honest and they're saying, listen, I don't want to have this conversation anymore, but I know it exists. Versus the people who are saying, oh, this problem exists and I'm trying to solve it, but you're not really trying to solve it because you know what you need to do to stop using polyester, stop using fabrics that's disposable, and when you do dispose of them, ends up in landfill somewhere. Stop producing garments in way too many quantities that's going to end up in countries like Nigeria or Ghana or Chile or, just far-flung places that affects people. Kantamanto market just got burnt in Ghana. There's just so many ripple effects that they don't think about because everyone is watching the bottom line, profitability. There's a tension. Let's address it. And then I also find that, it's quite old, to keep bashing the corporations, do this, do that. It's like herding cows. It's like talking about children. Like, they know what to do. If people know what to do, why do we keep, So that's definitely not what it is. They know what the problem is. So if they're not responding the way they should, that's what people need to address. Why are they not?
Are we part of the problem? We are the ones that buy these fashions. We don't demand more from these companies.
But my challenge with that is I think, I may be wrong, that with better education, better information, better, that's why I really do believe in the digital ID, passports and all of that. Maybe if you educate consumers, like, this is what it takes to make that shirt you're wearing. Actually, do you know that shirt you're wearing was made by a 5-year-old kid who should have been going to school? I doubt people will want to wear that shirt. They'll probably say, no, thank you very much. I'll rather spend £5 more or £10 more and buy that, So I think if you put the options right there out in front of people, you get a better understanding of, they're able to decide better. So I don't think the blame should go on consumers. I think, manufacturers need to take responsibility, and that's the race to the bottom, the cutthroat approach, to producing, to retail, to everything we see today.
Talk about your approach in Nigeria to merging these worlds, fashion and climate change.
So we have an interesting position. Sometimes we're like, where are we in this conversation? Because you have so many brands who, as far as they're concerned, I mean, if we think about the continent in general, only contribute 2% to this conversation as a continent. You think about, the carbon basins we have in Africa, we sometimes feel like we're doing good, but the reality is we know there's a lot of pollution. Like, if we're thinking about Nigeria, for example, and source of energy, generators blaring around so we do know how we contribute, to CO2 emissions. But if we think about fashion, most of the brands are small, they're nimble, you can see there's transparency, traceability, they design, they produce in a way that's made to last and last for a long time. If we look at our ethos and culture of wearing clothes, is passed down from generation to generation. Everything is handmade, handwoven. It's completely different. But we must also, but the challenge is a lot of designers probably don't even know what they're doing in that sense, and not from a place of ignorance. It's from a place of designing because that's who they are. And then, people are now coming up with all these terminologies and saying, we're talking about degrowth. No, actually, we're talking, there's just so many lingo out there. And so sometimes when they discover that, they probably have a chuckle. Like, I've been doing that for the last 20, 30 years. Nobody gave me a medal.
Do you think the global north, for example, can learn anything from the continent, particularly in Nigeria, when it comes to the fashion industry and reaching that level of sustainability?
I think a lot of people can borrow from what we do. Our approach to design, which is slow, which is community focused, is people focused. It's made well, it comes from the heart. So it's no longer, it's not just about making clothes for making clothes sake. It's, there's a purpose to it, there's meaning to it, and so much more. And I think, fast forward, when 2025, we can still make clothes like that. We can make clothes that people love and want to wear and pass down from generation to generation, because that's what we do. That's who we are.
And that's our show. While we're at the Thames, let's end the show on beavers. 2 of these important animals were released into the wild in March, here for the first time in centuries. Beavers are crucial for revitalizing rivers and wetlands. They build dams, nurture trees, and make the area they live in more welcoming to animals. See you next time. Bye.